Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Erasing the Stigma. Today, I am so honored to be here with Professor Larry Banks. So, Mr. Banks, would you be able to give listeners a snapshot of who you are?
Um, as of now, I am a professor teaching at Long Island University. I teach film and media production. Um, Before that, I was a cinematographer and filmmaker. So I'm known for such films as Juice and Strapped and Fly By Night, among many other music videos and documentaries. Did The Great and Mighty Walk, and others. So that's kind of a general thing in terms of I have a deep history in film, and now I do a lot of teaching out of the university.
That is amazing. Thank you. And yes, you have some really well-known films that you are a part of, which is really cool. And so, another aspect of who you are is that you have dyslexia. And so, you learned, if I'm correct, that you had dyslexia at a young age. So, I was wondering, how did learning that you had dyslexia at a young age first impact your academic ability? And secondly, if you would attribute your dyslexia to the career path that you ended up on.
Wow. When I was young and found out that I was dyslexic, it was probably around the age of 7 or 8, to be honest with you.
Mhm,
My mother was a teacher, and because she was a teacher, was why I was able to, they were able to kind of diagnose something fairly early on, because during that time, very few people knew what dyslexia was at all. It
mhm,
was not something that was well known. People didn't understand it. Um, there were a lot of things that were very, very new about the idea of dyslexia and kind of where it came from, because we're talking about in the early 60s, back at that time period. So
mhm,
not much was known. It didn't, the fact that I knew that I had dyslexia, it didn't help me very much, because it just seemed like dyslexia was just a name for my inability to be able to read at the same level, that everybody else was, and being
mhm,
able to do things that other students could do. So it wasn't a help, because nobody was able to isolate it for me and tell me how I could work with it. you know I went through a lot of, both psychological and remedial, kind of, reading stuff and stuff, trying to see if they could affect it, but not very much really was very effective, at that
mhm,
stage.
mhm. And I feel like that is even though you were talking about when you went to school in the 60s, that is still kind of a common connotation when people talk about dyslexia. It talks about your reading struggles, but and how dyslexia works against you, but there's not really a common conversation about how you can work with dyslexia and the amazing gifts that come with dyslexia. So even though time has passed between the 60s and now, that connotation is still present. And that's one of the reasons why I was so inspired to start these conversations because it should be widely talked about that there is a way to work with dyslexia. So, when you were in school, did you eventually figure out a way to work with it?
Well, what I was able to figure out when I was in school at a certain point was what I was good at. I was
Mhm,
able to begin to distinguish my strengths versus my weaknesses.
mhm,
Um, and that just meant that, I needed to take those things into account and to work with them often in a different way than I would, than most people were working with, you know, things. Teacher would send you home to write a paper. For me, the ideas in the paper, I could be extremely articulate,
mhm,
but the actual writing, not so great.
mhm,
So I had to work with people with the writing. I would write it out first and then work with somebody to help me clean up grammar and particular spelling, which was horrible at that time. And this is in an age that was before computers, so computer assisted, this makes it a lot easier.
yeah,
But prior to that, that was very difficult. I had to get somebody to work with me on things like that.
mhm.
But then, I started to realize that it wasn't that I wasn't smart. It was just that I couldn't articulate it in the way that they wanted it when it came to writing. I was very good at articulating it when it came to verbal communication, but not so much when it came to writing it down.
Mhm. And that something that I found interesting that you pointed out was that you recognize your strengths and your weaknesses, but in the areas that you would categorize as your weakness. So, for example, writing down the essays, you partnered with someone who had a strength in that. And that is something that I'm a huge advocate for because some people's weaknesses might be more apparent than others, but everyone has certain strengths, everyone has certain weaknesses and we should work together to balance each other out. And I think that's very important. And what you were saying when I was introducing you is that you are a professor now. So you work at a university level. And so, how you were talking about when you were in school, you weren't necessarily provided a space where the teaching was necessarily inclusive for you. So, for example, with the essay writing, how have you used your own experience in school to kind of, I guess, redefine the way that you work at a university level?
Well, there's several ways in which that works. For me, it works because I work at several different levels when I teach.
Hmm.
So I provide opportunities for students to express themselves in a lot of different modalities, which is really the key for me, what I found for myself, and what I believe in others. I can't say what's going to be your strength.
Hmm.
So, there is the opportunity to write certain things. There's the opportunity to demonstrate via working in photography or working in film, showing skills in different ways. When I present material, I present it both verbally, and then I also do slides, so there's stuff written. I present it graphically so that people can see it in a pictorial form, if that helps them to grasp the material more. So I work on when I teach on a lot of different levels, so that students, almost wherever they stand, wherever they are, will find a way to be able to work with material I'm trying to teach.
And I think that is really amazing because even when someone's going into the university level as a student, they might not have yet discovered how they learn best. So, by being able to juxtapose their learning when you're teaching it in one way compared to another way, that could really help them discover how they learn best. And then they could translate those skills to different portions of their academic experience. So, I really commend you for that because I think that is such an amazing way of teaching. And so, prior to you being a professor, you were a cinematographer, and then you worked as a gaffer, who is the chief lighting technician on set. So, going back to when you were younger, if I'm correct, you discovered your interest in lighting and mechanics as at a young age, and this was one of the strengths that you discovered. And was your interest in lighting and mechanics, and you having a space where you could basically use it as an outlet, was that helpful in first you're dealing with what you were going through at school with your dyslexia, and second, for you discovering what career path you wanted to follow?
Yes, and there are several different levels to how I was able to take the things that I found that I was strong in and move them over into something that I could be successful in. So
Mm,
let's go back. Early on, I realized that one of the things I loved a great deal was photography. I started with photography, and I set up my own dark room in my house. I built my own dark room from scratch. I turned a room in our basement into a photo lab. Um, and I taught myself how to not just to take pictures, but to develop pictures and to work with them, in a variety of different ways. This gave me a sense of confidence
Mhm.
The one thing that's not part of my work schedule that was also very helpful to me was that when I was younger, in my early teens, I started studying martial arts. And the studying of martial arts gave me a physical confidence, which I could translate into a sense of confidence about what I could do and couldn't do. I was relatively athletic, so I did sports in school as well as along with that, and that gave me a strength and a kind of foundation that allowed me to, as I started to figure out my career path, what I was going to do, it allowed me to do it with much more confidence. I wasn't afraid of who I was. There's a certain amount of shame that comes with feeling that you're dyslexic and you're kind of inferior, which isn't the case, but there's a certain amount that you carry with you. And this kind of helped me to overcome that. I realized that, I could have conversations with the most, intelligent people, and hold my own in a conversation, and realize that it's not the lack of intelligence, it's just the way in which I need to express it. And so I worked on ways in which I could express it both in writing, and through visual means, things I could do with photography and things I could do with cinematography.
And that is amazing. I love what you said that you found what you're strong in and that translated to your success because oftentimes it's regarded that only academic strengths can lead to success. But as you showed, yes, that is not right. And there are so many other aspects of activities that you can participate in that contribute to your success. And maybe it's not an explicit contribution, but like you were saying with sports and martial arts, that's more of an implicit contribution because you're able to grow your confidence. And when you go into the work field, then you have the confidence to hold your own. And even more so on the topic of, let's say, martial arts or sports, for example, when you go to have conversations with people who you regard of high intellect, maybe they're intellectual, say in the field of mathematics, and you're very intellectual in martial arts. Both of those are intellect. I mean, they're focused on different things, but they're both intellect and they're not necessarily regarded by the public in the same way. But I think that it's very important to change our regard in the way that we view both strengths and intellect, because as you show, that's very pivotal for a future career and for you, a very successful future career. So I think that that is very amazing. And especially for parents who are listening to look at what their child is strong in and support these strengths, even if these strengths you don't think are explicitly going to contribute to their later success.
Well, one of the things I think it's really important to understand is I've come to understand for myself that my conceptual understanding is extremely strong. I have a
Mhm.
really good way of perceiving and conceiving of ideas, both large and small. So that way that I have of conceptualizing things takes me into any area. I can use that in math, I can use that in English, I can use that in philosophy, I can use that literally across the board, in any area. So that's, again, recognizing that aspect of a strength where it's like I can understand something, and if I can understand it, I can understand the concepts behind it, and by understanding the concepts behind it, I can do anything.
Mhm. And that is very true. And I've found a trend that many people who do have dyslexia also have as one of the qualities a very good conceptual understanding and they're very good at visualizing different concepts. And I mean, your work as a cinematographer and a gaffer, I mean, that takes a huge conceptual and visual understanding. So, would you say that dyslexia played a role into your talents in those fields?
Absolutely. Um, my visualization ability, there are two parts of visualization that I think are extremely important. Um, I can visualize things in 3D, so I understand things in space. I can also visualize things in terms of where they lead to. So it becomes kind of a what I call a prescience, an understanding of a future. Where is that going to go? Where's this going to take me? What are the steps that are going to come after this based on what I've seen? And so those two particular aspects of visualization have taken me quite a ways in my career. As a gaffer working as an electrician, I could set lights and know exactly what level the light would be at a given point just through visualization. I could put it here and say over here it's going to be a 2.8 and know that. And people would measure it with the music. Well, how would you know that? And I said, this is just one of the skills I have is ability to see what that's going to do. So knowing the distances, understanding what it comes down to in terms of light, understanding what it meant, which is what kind of led me into cinematography. That my skills in terms of lighting, were clear and were very strong. People wanted me to be on set with them to light because they knew that that was the strength. I went from that to becoming a cinematographer and doing that, for projects, feature projects, music videos, documentaries, all kinds of stuff. And people wanted to experiment. And I was very open to experimentation and trying new things because for me, that was all part of an expansion, a sense of myself that I could feel myself growing into. So that was a really good part of what I was able to do. And it was like the further I went, this is the tricky part, the further I went in school, the more comfortable I became at school. So,
Mhm.
elementary school was probably the worst for me. As I moved into, junior high and high school, where all of a sudden conceptual knowledge became important and understanding concepts became important, I started to get better and started to shine there. By the time we got into college, I did quite well in college, actually, quite to my surprise. I was, having been a student in high school, I did not think of my career in college going to be very well academically. I just thought I would get through. But I found out that my first 3 semesters at college, I was on the dean's list.
Oh, wow.
Didn't even notice it until one of my friends told me. He said, "By the way, you're on the dean's list," and I had no idea because it
Oh
wasn't something that I was looking for, or expected to be there. I was just trying to get through my courses, getting through the various things I needed to do.
And that is really amazing because, I mean, as an elementary school student, it could be so discouraging when you're really not understanding what is being taught. And then as you progress through school, you kind of think that that discourage and that struggle is just going to be a part of your academic experience. But as you showed, it is not always the case, especially because going back to what you're talking about before, as you grow, you start to discover what methods of learning is most beneficial to you. So you're picking up more tools that help you, and you start to see that relationship between your strengths and your dyslexia and how you can use those to help in what you are doing. So, for example, what you were saying for your career as a gaffer, what you were talking about for your spatial awareness was actually really interesting because I read a study recently, or it was a survey, I think. But basically, they surveyed people with dyslexia and then people without dyslexia. And it was kind of a self report of who thought that they were better at spatial understanding and spatial awareness. And so, on average, more people with dyslexia reported that they had a better understanding of spatial and 3D awareness. And so that's actually really interesting with the lighting because it kind of shows how the strengths that dyslexia can give you can, in a way, compensate for the proclaimed weaknesses. So, for example, sometimes people with dyslexia struggle in math. And as a gaffer, as you're describing, a lot of that is mathematical, trying to figure out the placement of everything. But because you had such a strong strength in spatial awareness, you didn't necessarily need a very strong mathematical brain to become successful in that field. So I just also find that that is really interesting how dyslexia's strengths could kind of of work in tandem with like those weaknesses.
Yeah, that's always a fascinating subject because in general, I would never have thought of myself as being strong in mathematics.
Hmm.
But for me, mathematics is something that I found that I am strong in because I'm able to visualize and understand the concepts of
Hmm.
math and how they fit. So understanding how math works gave me the ability to be able to do kind of basic mathematics because I would conceive of it differently. I do multiplication in terms of spaces and sizes that I can see and and come to the right answer. It's easy for me to work with in that way. So the the aspect of how you work, how the brain functions is really interesting in that it can cover a large area that's not normally considered in when you focus in on just a particular attribute. As you allow that to spread, you can find that those things grow and they actually give you the ability to do things that most people can't.
And that is very true. And that growth definitely comes with like a person's development throughout school. So, like you were saying, elementary school is very hard. And just going back to the idea of math, at least at my school, I remembered we had to do timetables to do multiplication. And I think every week we'd have like a time test. And in that really rigid environment, you wouldn't have the space to discover the way that you best learn with multiplication. But as you get older, there is a bright side because there is less rigidity in the schooling, and you have more freedom to pursue your own interest or pursue your own learning techniques and style. So there is definitely a light at the end of the tunnel for anyone who has a student or who is a student at a younger age who are struggling. And there is a time where those struggles you will find, the strengths within those struggles, which is something that's very important to remember.
Yeah.
So, my next question for you is going through the different careers that you are a part of. You are a very prominent and successful director of photography. And so that can be seen as kind of a beneficial field, definitely, for someone with dyslexia, as it requires a lot of creativity and spatial awareness, but it's also a bit paradoxical because you have to read the scripts and you have to be very fast at reading them. And so I just wanted to know how you were able to find success in a field that other people with dyslexia might turn away from because of that requirement of having to do some quick reading.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Um, at the time when I became a cinematographer, the note for that piece, when I started to do that kind of cinematography, when you're doing documentaries, you it's different. You can do things that don't require so much with scripting. But when you start doing feature films, it requires being able to get through a script. And at that time, there was development of a piece of equipment called a Kurzweil machine, and this is going back quite a number of years, but they had a Kurzweil machine that they literally had in the public library in New York, and there was like two in the entire city.
Oh, wow.
And I found out where they were, and one of the things that I would do would be, it's like if I had an interview with somebody, I was going out for a job as a, cinematographer on a particular feature, I would take that script and I would run it into the city or run it into, to the library so that I could then sit there with it and read through it, which made it possible you know, for me, the quick reading was I would place it on the machine and it would read back to me, it would read everything to me. Now, this is possible now with the most basic equipment in terms of your computer.
Mhm.
Now, a PDF file can be read. Voice Dream is a great tool for dyslexics if they, if you're using that. But if you've got a Mac computer, it can read anything to you. There's not, it's not difficult at all. But at that time, that didn't exist. Computers weren't, part of, people's daily equipment. But the Kurzweil was something that I found and I used, so that once I could read it, I could see it. Once I could see it, I could talk about it.
And that's really amazing because I feel like for many, when you are presented with weaknesses and you're identifying your weaknesses, it might feel discouraging. But what you've shown is that by identifying your weaknesses, even though this sounds paradoxical, it does open the door to possibilities because when you identify your weakness, you can identify things to help you, like you did. And then you are able to then, in your case, enter that career path that you wanted to follow or pursue things that you want to do. So there is opportunity and possibility that is kind of, I guess, hidden behind those straight or behind those weaknesses that you can look for in those weaknesses.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are tons of stuff that's there. But you have to go for it. That's the
Mhm.
weird thing is you really have to you have to reach for it and realize that you're not at a loss. You just have to find out where the strength is.
And that is sometimes the hardest part. It's not that there isn't accommodations out there, tools out there that can help you. It's just trying to find them and definitely being persistent in your pursuit and just not giving up and trying to find them. So, talking about looking for ways to help yourself, if you were to tell listeners how you would want your story and your resilience throughout your career. How would you want this to influence them and maybe inspire them to go after a career that might not be typically associated as something that people with dyslexia might be successful in?
Well, the one thing that I will say is that if you're dyslexic, this is true for dyslexics and it's true for regular people as well. The key to finding a career path, the key to figuring out ways of approaching stuff is to one, get a sense of who you are, and two, that what you have passion about are the things that you're going to be able to be successful in, regardless of what it might look like on the outside.
Mhm.
The mathematics and the reading that come with being a cinematographer, the understanding of f-stops versus shutter speeds versus these kinds of things. Oh, they're daunting for people until you have a passion for it. Your passion will help you overcome those things and find the ways to get to your strength through your passion. So that's really what I would recommend to people is find out what you're passionate about, let your passions guide you into the fields that will work for you.
And I really think that is such great advice. And especially for students who are younger, that's like really the great thing about school is both it can help you identify who you are, what your passions are. And then even though school might be an environment that's more rigid and you might not be able to pursue those passions, by the time that you graduate high school, college, graduate school, you go into a world where there are so many opportunities that you can pursue those identified passions. So even though it might be hard getting through school and trying to fit within that really rigid school system, it will be worth it at the end because you're able to jump into a career or pursue something that you are really passionate about. And with that passion, you will also gain a resilience for whatever you are pursuing.
Yeah. And you'll develop a strength in it. I mean, I think
Mhm.
that you can start, the passion starts early.
Mhm.
For people that start, you look at what it is that you like and start to listen to yourself. Listen to your own inner voice when it comes to finding your passion. And don't wait for the technical opportunity to do it with school and all of those things, but pursue it outside.
Mhm.
Pursue it. I did photography on my own. I didn't care about school. Did I take photography in school? Yes, I did take it later in school, but I did photography. I loved it, so I did it on my own, and I found ways of setting up a dark room, and I found ways of understanding how to develop my negative and do my printing and do all the things that I wanted to do. Um, you do that by just going after it, feeling your passion and pursuing it and not letting anything kind of get in the way of that. And then you find that, oh, well, photography and cinematography, they're the same thing. These two things are akin to each other. They're natural pieces. Said, oh, I already know what light is. I already know what a light meter does. I already know what f-stops are. This isn't stuff I have to learn. This is just stuff I have to apply to a slightly different medium. So that's where it will help you. You
Mhm.
know, if you find something you like, and it doesn't really matter what it is, you'll find connections to it, to the things that you'll be able to pursue as a career.
And that is very true. And that just goes back to what you were saying before about really having to pursue opportunities and what you're interested and that can lead to so much more and it can lead to things that are unexpected and I just love what you said and I want to reiterate it that you have to listen to yourself because something about stigmas especially those surrounding learning differences is that the stigma is going to tell you what you can't do. And if you are passionate about something, you can't listen to that and you have to listen to yourself. So, the final question that I will ask you, and it kind of has to do with stigmas, is what is one thing that you think our listeners can do to erase the stigma behind language based learning differences?
The key to erasing the stigma on language-based learning differences is to understand that you um, have something that's totally unique,
Mhm.
period. That your uniqueness can find its way to flower if you give it a chance. The stigmas that come with it are other people's opinions about you. What you have to develop is your own good opinion about you, which is why I say pursue your passions, pursue the things you love, because you'll be great at them. And being great at those things will translate. My being good at sports, my being good at martial arts helped me to feel good about myself so that I could pursue the passions that I love that led me into photography, then cinematography, and so forth, and then it led me into teaching, because I love the giving back. So being able to return what I've learned is also became a part of that. So all of this is the way in which we erase the stigma. It's by believing in oneself more strongly.
And I think that is such amazing advice, believing in yourself and becoming confident in yourself. Because, I mean, people throughout your life, they're going to come in and out of your life. And some people might tell you to go for it, which is amazing. But other people are going to tell you that you can't do this. And you can't let other people sway you in different directions. You have to be strong in who you are and stand for what you want. So, thank you so much for speaking with me today. And I just hope listeners can benefit from this conversation because I know I did.
Thank you so much for having me, Julie.
Bye.